Nurse Mara Ellis stood in the emergency corridor with both hands open, palms visible, while the CEO of Meridian Cross Hospital pointed straight at her face as if she were something that had wandered in from the street. "Get her away from him," Victor Vale snapped, his voice cutting through the ER doors. The waiting families, the security guards, and the row of nurses who had frozen mid-step. Mara could not hear the exact sharpness of his words, but she read the anger on his mouth, the command in his finger, the disgust in his eyes. Beside the stretcher, a retired military named Ranger refused to move from the patient's side. Mara signed one warning. Nobody listened. Then Ranger looked at the thin chain hidden beneath her scrub collar, and Mara's face changed as if the past had stepped into the room. Before this story continues, tell us in the comments what country you are watching from. And if you believe quiet people are often carrying the heaviest truth, subscribe to Silent Valor 9 for more emotional stories of loyalty, courage, and justice. The emergency corridor outside Meridian Cross Air had never been silent. Not even at 3 in the morning. Monitors chimed behind glass doors. Wheel rattle across polished floors. Families whispered prayers under harsh white lights. Nurses moved with the quick practice rhythm of people who had learned to stay calm while everyone else fell apart. But when Victor Vale arrived, silence moved through the corridor like a command. He came in through the ambulance entrance wearing a dark coat over a tailored suit, his silver hair still perfect, despite the hour. 2 hospital administrators followed him, pale and nervous. A security guard hurried ahead to clear the hallway. Everyone knew Victor Vale. He was not only the CEO of Vale Biomedical, the biggest donor Meridian Cross had ever had. His name was on the new trauma wing, the cardiac center, the research tower, and half the plaques hanging in the lobby. Tonight, he did not look like a donor. He looked like a man who believed the hospital belonged to him. On the stretcher in front of him lay his younger brother, Henry Vale, a decorated veteran who had collapsed during a private ceremony at the hospital's charity wing. Henry was conscious but weak, his eyes moving restlessly beneath the oxygen mask. His service dog, Ranger, a calm German shepherd with a graying muzzle and alert amber eyes, walked beside the stretcher with controlled discipline. One of Ranger's paws brushed the wheel every few steps, as if he were counting the distance to keep himself steady. Mara Ellis saw Ranger first. She had been restocking the trauma bay when the doors burst open. She turned at the vibration of movement, not sound. Mara had been deaf for 8 years, long enough that the air's chaos reached her through lights, movement, pressure, and faces. She read mouths when she could. She signed when someone knew how. Mostly, she watched what everyone else missed, and Ranger was telling her something. The dog was not panicking. He was not pulling, whining, or losing focus. His body remained steady, but his eyes kept shifting from Henry's hand to the medication bag clipped to the stretcher rail, then to the doctor, then back to Henry's hand. A warning. Mara stepped forward and touched Dr. Lena Ortiz lightly on the sleeve. Lena turned, already tense. Mara signed quickly, then wrote on the tablet she carried in her scrub pocket. Check service file. Do not separate dog. Possible medication sensitivity. Nay, alerting. Lena read it, her brow tightening. Victor Vale saw the exchange and moved between them. What is she doing? He demanded. Mara caught the shape of the words, but not the tone. She did not need the tone. Victor's mouth was hard. His eyes went to Mara's hearing aids, then to her hands, then to Ranger. This is a restricted case, he said. My brother needs physicians, not distractions. Mara signed again, slower this time. Ranger is trained to alert. He is not in the way. Lena spoke for her. Mr. Vale, Nurse Ellis is saying the dog might be alerting to a medical issue. We should She is a nurse, Victor cut in. A deaf nurse, standing in an emergency corridor, trying to direct a critical case with hand signal. The words landed, even before Mara read all of them. She saw the administrator behind him glance down in shame. She saw another nurse turn away. She saw the security guard shift his stance as though waiting for permission to remove her. Henry moved weakly on the stretcher. Ranger stepped closer to him. Mara looked only at the dog. Ranger's ears lifted at the sight of her hands. Not because he understood ordinary signs. Not because he was simply well-trained. He recognized one movement. Mara's fingers formed a small controlled gesture near her chest. Ranger obeyed instantly. That was when Victor noticed. His head snapped toward Mara. "What did you do?" Mara lowered her hands. Victor pointed at her, then sharp and public. His finger no more than a foot from her face. "Everyone back," he ordered. "Remove her from my brother's case." The corridor stopped moving. Mara stood still. Her face remained calm, but inside her chest something old tightened. Something she had buried beneath years of night shifts, patient charts, and careful silence. She had faced commanders, surgeons, grieving families, and men with medals who thought rank made them right. She had learned that anger made people deaf in ways hearing loss never could. She typed again. "Please check his veteran file. He might have a protected alert under a prior deployment record." Victor looked at the tablet and gave a short, humorless laugh. "Me brother's file is not your business." Lena's eyes moved from Victor to Mara. "We need to stabilize him. If there is an alert, there is no alert. She knows that I do not." Victor's voice lowered, but the hallway still watched him. "And I will not have my brother turned into a spectacle because a nurse wants to play soldier with a dog." Mara's hand went to her collar before she could stop it. The movement was small, too small for most people, but Ranger saw it. His gaze fixed on the place beneath her scrub top where a thin chain rested against her skin. Mara caught his stare and slowly dropped her hand. Victor saw that too. "What is under your shirt?" he asked. Mara did not answer. His eyes narrowed. "Take it off if it has anything to do with this case." Lena stepped forward. "Mr. Vale, that is inappropriate." "Inappropriate? Inappropriate is letting a staff member interfere with emergency care." Victor looked at the security guard. "Escort her out of this corridor." The guard hesitated. Mara did not move. For one breath, all she saw was Ranger. His eyes were still fixed on her, calm, knowing, waiting. Then Henry's hand twitched beneath the blanket, two fingers moving in a faint pattern against the sheet. Mara's breath caught. It was not random. It was a sign, not a hospital sign, not something Lena would recognize. Mara stepped closer before anyone could stop her and signed one question to Henry. "Who told you?" Henry's eyes opened just enough to find her. His fingers moved again before dawn. Mara froze. Victor did not understand the movement, but he saw its effect. He saw the color leave Mara's face. He saw Ranger's tail go still. He saw Lena lean forward as if the air itself had changed. "What did he say?" Victor demanded. Mara looked down at Henry, then at Ranger, then at the tablet in her hand. She typed only 4 words. "You need his file." Victor read it and shook his head with open contempt. "Get her out." Security reached for Mara's arm. Ranger moved once, not aggressively, not loudly, just enough to place his body between the guard and Mara. The guard stopped. Victor's expression hardened. "Control that dog." Mara signed to Ranger again. "Safe." Ranger stepped back, but not away from her. That obedience, instant and precise, made the corridor's silence deeper. Lena stared at Mara now, not as a nurse being protected from a CEO's temper, but as someone who had just witnessed a locked door open for 1 second. Mara saw the question on Lena's face. Who are you? Mara did not answer. She turned away before the question could reach her, because if she answered too soon, she would have to say a name she had not spoken in years. A name buried in a report the army had sealed. A name connected to Ranger Henry Vale, and the words, Henry's shaking hand, had just formed in the middle of an emergency corridor. Before dawn, security escorted Mara only as far as the staff alcove beside the supply room. The guard, a young man named Ellis with nervous eyes and a badge too new for the pressure, did not touch her again after Ranger stepped between them. He simply walked beside her as if following the CEO's order could be done without cruelty. Mara appreciated that. She had learned to count small mercies. Inside the alcove, beneath the buzzing fluorescent light, she could feel more than hear. She stood with her back against the wall and watched the ER doors swing shut behind Henry Vale. Ranger was allowed in after Lena insisted. The dog was part of the patient's medical support. Victor argued. Lena did not flinch. The doors closed before Mara could see how the argument ended. For 3 minutes, Mara stayed still. Then her phone vibrated. A text from Lena appeared. He is unstable. No full record in hospital system. Medication history incomplete. What do you know? Mara stared at the words until they blurred. She knew too much. 8 years earlier, before Meridian Cross, before hearing aids, before she learned how many people mistook silence for weakness, Mara Ellis had worn a different uniform. She had been a combat medical specialist attached to a small rescue unit that worked with 9 teams. They moved into places before official daylight, before cameras, before names entered reports. Their job was not glory. Their job was to pull people out alive and disappear before anyone asked how. One operation had changed everything. The official file called it a recovery mission. The people who survived called it before dawn. Marie never called it anything. Names made memories too easy to find. She had left service with damaged hearing, a sealed record, and 2 metal dog tags she kept hidden under her scrubs. One carried her name. The other carried a unit code no civilian was supposed to recognize. Ranger recognized it. Henry Vale recognized it. And now Henry was in Mara's with a missing medical alert and a brother powerful enough to silence the room. Mara typed back to Lena. Check for reaction to standard sedative. Ask if he has old 9 service records under Department of Defense transfer. Look for code BD17 or Dawn relay. A few seconds passed. Lena replied. BDA. Answer. The door to the alcove opened. Chief Nurse Nora Bell stepped in, gray-haired, solid, and tired in the way only lifelong nurses became tired. She looked at Mara with worry rather than judgment. I know you can read me, Nora said carefully, making sure her mouth was visible. Victor Vale wants you off the floor for the rest of the night. Mara nodded once. Nora exhaled. Lena says you might know something important. Mara lifted her tablet. I know enough to prevent a mistake, not enough to explain publicly. Nora read it, then looked through the narrow window toward the ER. I asked this about the dog? Mara hesitated. Then she typed, the dog is the witness. Nora's face changed. There were people who would have laughed at that sentence. Nora Bell did not. She had worked enough nights to know that sometimes the only living thing in a room telling the truth was not human. Before Nora could answer, the ER doors opened again. Ranger slipped through. He did not run. He did not bark. He moved with disciplined urgency, his nails tapping softly across the floor. A sound Mara could not hear but could feel through the soles of her shoes. A junior nurse tried to catch his leash, but Ranger walked directly to the alcove and stopped in front of Mara. His vest was still secured. His eyes were steady. In his mouth, held gently between his teeth, was a folded strip of blue hospital tape. Mara crouched, Ranger released it into her hand. On the tape, written in shaky pen, were 3 letters. M.E. Mara, stop breathing. Nora leaned closer. AIS, that your initials. Mara closed her fist around the tape. From inside the trauma bay, Victor appeared at the doorway. He saw Ranger with Mara, and his fury returned at once. Why is that dog out here? He demanded. Lena stepped into view behind him. Her face was controlled, but her eyes were sharp. Because your brother sent him, she said. Victor turned. My brother is barely conscious. He wrote something, Lena replied. Or tried to. Victor looked back at Mara. The whole corridor looked back at Mara. Mara rose slowly, tape hidden in her palm. Victor walked toward her with the contained rage of a man who believed every delay was an insult. What are you doing to him? Mara typed, trying to keep him safe. He laughed again, but this time the laugh sounded less certain even to people who could hear it. My brother has specialists, private physicians, federal contacts, and a medical team that has followed him for years. And you expect me to believe he needs a night shift nurse who cannot even hear his monitor? The sentence struck the corridor harder than the first insult. A younger nurse looked at the floor. The security guard swallowed. Nora's jaw tightened. Mara did not react. Not outwardly. She had heard worse before she went deaf. And since losing her hearing, she had learned that cruelty did not require sound. It had shape. It had posture. It had a finger pointed in your face while witnesses waited to see if you would break. She lifted her tablet again. His monitor is visible. His dog is trained. His hand signs are deliberate. Your private file is incomplete. Victor leaned close enough for her to read every word. You know nothing about my brother. Mara looked past him toward Henry's room. That was not true. She knew how Henry Vale held pressure when he was afraid. She knew he tapped twice when pain climbed, but he refused to admit it. She knew he had once crawled across a ruined floor to keep Ranger breathing against his chest, whispering apologies into the dog's fur. Though the dog was never at fault, she knew he had survived because someone else had not. But she could not say that. Not yet. Because the full truth would open a grave inside the Vale family that Victor had spent years covering with money, plaques, and polished speeches. Lena approached Mara and held out her hand. Show me, she said. Mara looked at her. Lena's mouth formed the words again, softer. Whatever he sent. Show me. Mara opened her palm. The tape lay there. M.E. Lena stared at it, then at Mara. Victor snatched the tape before anyone could stop him. Mara stayed on Mara's collar. Mara felt the chain beneath her scrub top like a line of fire. Victor noticed the dog's stare again. His gaze dropped. There it is, he said quietly. That necklace, whatever it is, it has him fixated. Nora stepped between them. Mr. Vale. No. Victor pointed at Mara again. This has gone far enough. If she is using some military trinket to trigger my brother or that dog, I want it removed from this hospital. Mara's hand closed over her collar. It was the first time her calm visibly cracked, and everyone saw it. Lena saw grief, not guilt. Nora saw fear, not defiance. Victor saw only something hidden. Take it off, he ordered. Mara shook her head once. Victor's voice dropped to a dangerous softness. Then you prove my point. Ranger stepped closer to Mara, but she signed him back. Stay. The dog obeyed, though his body remained tense. Lena turned to Victor. You have no authority to strip a staff member of personal property. I have authority over every wing, my company funds. No, Nora said, her voice hard now. You do not own the people in it. For one moment, Victor looked genuinely surprised that anyone had spoken to him that way. Then, the trauma bay alarm lights flashed. Mara saw the red reflection across the corridor. Lena turned and ran back through the doors. Victor followed. Ranger hesitated, looking from Mara to the bay. Mara signed. Go, Ranger went. The doors swung closed again. Nora touched Mara's elbow, gentle enough to ask permission. Mara looked at her. Nora spoke slowly. Whatever that chain is, whatever you are protecting, you might not have until morning to keep it hidden. Mara looked toward the dark windows at the end of the corridor. Dawn was still hours away, and already the past was finding her. The first official change in the room came at 3:41 a.m. when Dr. Lena Ortiz stopped an order with her hand half an inch from the medication scanner. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting. No one outside the trauma bay knew how close they had come to making the wrong choice. Henry Vale's vitals had shifted in a pattern that suggested he needed sedation before a scan. A resident had prepared the standard dose, following the incomplete chart transferred from Henry's private physician. Victor stood behind the glass, arms crossed, watching every movement, as if the medical team were a board of directors failing to meet quarterly numbers. Ranger stood near the wall where Lena had placed him, leash looped safely around a chair leg, calm but alert. When the resident lifted the syringe, Ranger rose, not lunging, not barking, just rising, his eyes fixed on the medication. Lena saw it. She also saw the note Mara had sent her. Possible reaction to standard sedative. "Hold," Lena said. The resident paused. "Doctor, hold the dose." Victor stepped forward outside the glass. "What is happening now?" Lena ignored him for 3 seconds, long enough to check Henry's pupils. His pulse, the pattern of his breathing, and the way Ranger had shifted. Then she ordered an alternative. The resident hesitated. "That is not in his chart." "No," Lena said. "But his chart is missing something." The alternative stabilized Henry enough for the scan. No one applauded. No one announced a miracle. Emergency medicine rarely looked like miracles from the inside. It looked like 1,000 small decisions made before disaster had time to introduce itself. But Lena knew. So did Ranger. When the scan team wheeled Henry toward imaging, Ranger walked beside him, steady and controlled. As they passed the staff alcove, Mara stood just inside the doorway, officially removed from the case, unofficially watching everything. Henry's eyes opened. For 1 second, they met hers. His fingers moved against the sheet. Not much, just 2 taps. A pause. 1 tap. Mara closed her eyes. It was the old field signal for alive. She signed back before she could stop herself. Stay alive. Ranger saw it and looked up at her with recognition so deep it hurt. Victor saw that exchange too. This time he did not shout. His anger had sharpened into suspicion. After the scan, the hospital opened a temporary command room in the consultation suite near the ER. Victor demanded it. Administrators brought laptops, phones, and coffee. No one drank. The private physician's records were pulled. Meridian's legal officer joined by video. Henry's military discharge documents were requested through an emergency channel, but the system returned only partial access. Restricted veteran medical attachment authorization required. Victor slammed his palm on the conference table. "My company built half the data systems this hospital uses," he said. "Do not tell me I cannot access my brother's medical file." The legal officer looked uncomfortable through the screen. "Sir, certain Department of Defense medical attachments require patient permission or specific clearance. He is my brother. That is not the same as clearance." Victor turned to Lena. "You started this. You and that nurse." Lena's face remained composed. "Your brother's life might depend on information not in the civilian chart. Me brother has spent years trying to forget that part of his life." The words came out too fast. Everyone in the room noticed. Victor noticed that they noticed. He looked away first. Nora stood near the door with Mara's tablet in her hand. Mara had been allowed into the room only because Lena refused to continue without the person who had warned them correctly. Victor objected, then lost the argument when the alternative medication began working. Mara stood slightly behind Nora, hands folded, eyes moving from face to face. She hated command rooms. Hospitals had different furniture, better coffee, softer chairs, but command rooms always felt the same. Men and women gathered around a table, trying to control the damage after the truth had already left the building. Lena turned to her. Mara, you mentioned BD-17. We searched it in the civilian system. Nothing. The veteran portal flagged it and locked us out. What is BD? Mara looked at Victor. His expression said he expected her to lie. She typed slowly. I cannot disclose classified operation details. I can say Henry might have been treated under a battlefield medical protocol not included in his public record. Victor scoffed. Convenient. Mara continued typing. His service dog might recognize alerts from that time. Do not dismiss the dog. Victor leaned forward. Stop hiding behind that animal. Ranger, who had been lying quietly beside Henry's empty stretcher near the door while the scan processed, lifted his head. Mara's eyes moved to him. She signed without thinking. Calm. Ranger lowered his head again. The room saw it. Lena's voice softened. How does he know your signs? Mara's hands still. There it was. The question. Victor answered before she could, because she has been provoking him. Nora turned on him. That dog is calmer with her than with anyone else in this building, which should concern you. It does, Lena said. Mara looked at her. Lena did not look cruel. She looked like a doctor measuring a wound she could not see. It concerns me because Ranger is trained. Henry is responding to you. And you knew about a medication risks that his own chart did not show. So I am going to ask once, not as your supervisor and not in front of him as an accusation. She glanced at Victor, then back at Mara. Were you connected to Henry Vale before tonight? Mara's chest tightened. She could lie by omission. She had done it for years. She could say she had treated many veterans and leave Henry among them, like one shadow in a crowd. But Henry had signed before dawn, and Ranger had carried her initials. Mara typed, yes. Victor stood so suddenly his chair slid back. What? Lena held up a hand. Let her answer. Mara typed again, a long time ago, not as his nurse at Meridian. Victor's mouth moved around words Mara did not want to read. You knew him and said nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she typed, he asked me not to. Victor stared. The command room shifted. That was the first clue that did not belong to medicine. It belonged to pain. Nora read the message and whispered, oh, Henry. Victor's face hardened again. But now the anger had something else beneath it. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Wearing an expensive suit. My brother would not hide something like that from me. Mara did not type. Victor looked around the room, searching for someone who would agree with him. No one did. Lena's phone vibrated. She checked it. The scan shows no immediate surgical issue, she said, but his condition is still unexplained. The old protocol matters. We need access. The legal officer on video cleared his throat. There might be another route. The restricted attachment references a field authentication token. It says access can be released with matching service identifiers from surviving medical personnel or unit command. Victor looked at Mara's collar. Mara felt the chain again. Lena followed his gaze. What kind of service identifiers? Lena asked. The legal officer read from the screen. Physical tags, coded unit card, or equivalent chain of custody item. The system notes a 9 medevac attachment. The room went still. Ranger lifted his head. Mara stepped back once. Victor's eyes narrowed. Dog tags? No one said anything. The legal officer looked from one face to another through the screen. If someone present has matching tags, they might unlock the emergency medical attachment. Victor turned toward Mara slowly. The pointing finger came back, but now was not only contempt, it was accusation demand, and the first edge of desperation. You have them, he said. Mara's hand went to her collar. Nora shook her head. Victor, do not. He ignored her. You have been standing in my hospital, wearing proof, while my brother lies in there, waiting for a file. Mara typed with one hand, the other gripping the hidden chain. The file will not only give medical history. Victor, read it. What does that mean? Mara did not answer. Henry's monitor lights flashed through the glass wall down the hall. Lena looked toward them. We may not have time to care what else it gives, she said. Mara looked at Ranger. The dog stood now, not anxious, not unsafe, simply ready. He walked to Mara and sat at her feet. Then he lifted his nose and touched the center of her chest, right where the tags rested beneath cotton. Mara closed her eyes. For 8 years, she had kept that chain hidden because it was easier to be underestimated than questioned. Easier to be mocked as the deaf nurse than recognized as the last medic from a mission whose truth had broken families. Easier to let Victor Vale believe she knew nothing than tell him his brother had survived because another man had not. Lena spoke gently. Mara, is the medical information in there necessary? Mara opened her eyes. She nodded. Victor's face changed at the nod, not softening, but losing some of its certainty. Then, take them off, he said. Mara looked at him. He still did not understand. Those tags were not jewelry. They were not a password. They were not a thing to be demanded by a man who had humiliated her in front of the ER. They were weight. They were witness. They were the sound of a promise she had never known how to keep. Mara typed one sentence. Not in this room. Victor's jaw tightened. My brother might be dying. Lena's eyes flashed. He is not dying at this moment. And you will not use fear to bully my nurse? Mara looked at Lena in surprise. My nurse? The words moved through Mara strangely. She had worked at Meridian Cross for 3 years. She had been reliable, skilled, quiet. Some staff liked her, some pitied her. Some avoided the effort of communicating with her. She had never needed anyone to claim her. But in that moment, Lena did. Victor looked from Lena to Nora to Ranger and realized the room had shifted again. The deaf nurse was no longer standing alone. Mara typed, I will unlock what is needed, but if the file opens fully, you might learn things Henry chose not to tell you. Victor's mouth tightened. Then he should have told me. Mara looked at him with a sadness so direct that he looked away. The phone in Lena's hand vibrated again. Henry was waking. They moved back to the ER together, not as a team yet, but as people pulled by the same dock thread. Henry Vale lay under soft lights, his face pale, his eyes open just enough to track movement. Ranger returned to his side and rested his head near Henry's hand. Henry's fingers found the dog's fur and relaxed. Victor went to the bed first. Henry, he said, I'm here. Henry's eyes shifted toward him, but did not settle. They searched the room until they found Mara. Victor saw it. So did everyone else. Mara stood near the foot of the bed, still outside the circle of authority, still with her hands folded, still wearing the hidden chain. Henry's fingers moved. Mara stepped closer. Lena angled the bed light so Mara could see his hand clearly. Henry signed slowly with effort. You kept them. Mara pressed her lips together. She signed back. Yes. Victor watched the exchange with increasing frustration. What is he saying? No one answered because no one else knew. Henry signed again. Ranger knows. Mara's eyes filled, but no tears fell. She signed. I know. Victor looked at Lena. Translate. Lena shook her head. I can't. His gaze went to Mara. Then you translate. Mara typed instead. He asked about something I kept. What? She did not answer. Henry's fingers moved again, weaker now. Before dawn, Ranger lifted his head at the phrase, even though it was signed, not spoken. Mara felt the room tilt. Victor stepped closer. Why does he keep saying that? Mara looked at Henry. His eyes were pleading now. Not for himself, for time, for courage, for the truth to arrive gently enough that it did not destroy what remained. Mara typed. It was the name used by survivors of the mission. Victor stared. What mission? Mara's hand hovered over the screen. Henry's fingers closed weakly in Ranger's fur. Mara typed. The one your family stopped discussing. Victor went very still. The monitors reflected green light across his face. For the first time all night, he looked less like a CEO and more like a brother. That was not a mission, he said quietly. That was an accident overseas, a transport failure. Henry came home and refused to speak about it. Mara looked at him with quiet grief. It was not an accident. The words were on her tablet before she could decide whether to show them. Victor read them. His expression emptied. Nora crossed herself once, almost unconsciously. Lena looked from Mara to Henry to Ranger. What was it? Lena asked. Mara shook her head. Not here, but Henry's grip on Ranger tightened. His eyes stayed on Victor now. He seemed to understand that silence had protected no one. It had only delayed the pain. He signed one word. Open. Mara stared at him. Henry signed it again. Open. Ranger stood, walked to Mara and pressed his shoulder against her leg. The dog was not demanding. He was anchoring her. Mara remembered another floor, another darkness before morning. Henry younger, covered in dust, gripping Ranger with one arm while Mara worked with shaking hands. She remembered a voice calling her by her old call sign. She remembered someone pressing tags into her palm and saying, if we don't make it, make sure the dog gets home. Make sure Henry tells the truth when he can. But Henry had not been able to tell the truth, and Mara had mistaken silence for loyalty. Lena's voice brought her back. Mara, we need the medical attachment. Mara nodded. She reached beneath her scrub collar. Victor watched every movement. So did the nurses outside the glass. Word had spread silently through the ER. The CEO, who had humiliated the deaf nurse, was now waiting for something hidden under her uniform. People who had looked away earlier now looked directly at her, as if ashamed they had not seen her sooner. Mara pulled the chain free. The dog tags slid into the light. Two dull metal tags rested against her palm. Victor's face tightened. They were worn, scratched, and ordinary to anyone who did not understand what ordinary metal could carry. Mara did not let them fall. Not yet. She held them close and walked to the secure tablet Lena had prepared. The legal officer guided them through the emergency access page. Mara entered her name. The system rejected it. Former service identity required. Mara closed her eyes. Of course. She typed another name, Mara Quinn Ellis. The system paused. Then it asked for physical identifier scan. Lena held out the scanner. Mara placed the first tag against it. A soft beep. Then the second. The tablet screen changed. Restricted attachment found. Mine Medevac Unit 13. Operation file. Before dawn. Victor read the words. His hand went to the edge of Henry's bed. The room stopped pretending this was only about a medical chart. Lena, focused despite the shock, scanned quickly for the emergency section. There, she said. Prior adverse response, neurological trigger, old field stabilizing protocol. This changes treatment. The room moved at once. Lena gave orders. Nurses prepared the adjusted plan. Nora guided staff with calm efficiency. Ranger stayed close to Henry. His presence allowed now not as a courtesy, but as part of the truth. Mara stepped back, tag still in hand. Victor did not speak for several minutes. He watched Lena treat his brother, using information that only existed because Mara had unlocked a sealed past. He watched Henry's breathing ease. He watched Ranger settle when the correct medication entered. He watched the monitors steady. Then he turned to Mara. For the first time, he did not point. "What happened to my brother?" he asked. Mara looked at Henry. Henry's eyes were closed now, not unconscious in the frightening way, but resting. His hand remained on Ranger. Lena checked the monitor and nodded slightly. "He is improving," she said, slowly. Victor's voice dropped. That is not what I asked." Mara typed. "Ask him when he is strong enough." Victor read it and shook his head. "No, I have lived for 8 years with half a story. My brother came home silent. My parents died thinking." He blamed himself. "I built a foundation in the name of men whose names I was told I did not have clearance to know. And tonight, a nurse I insulted unlocks a file with my family's missing years inside it." His mouth trembled once before he controlled it. "Do not tell me to wait." Mara looked at him for a long time. She wanted to hate him. It would have been easier. But grief had a way of making people cruel before it made them honest. Victor's cruelty did not excuse him. It only explained why his hands were shaking now. Mara typed carefully. "There was a rescue before sunrise. Henry was not supposed to survive. Ranger led us to him. Another man held the route open long enough for us to get out." Victor stared at the tablet. "What man?" Mara's hand tightened around the tags. Henry's eyes opened. His fingers moved on Ranger's fur. "No." Mara looked at him. Henry signed again, weak but clear. "Before dawn." Then he pointed, not at Victor, but at Mara's closed fist. The second tag. Mara shook her head once. Henry's eyes filled. He signed. He was his friend too. Victor looked between them. "Whose tag is that?" Mara could not breathe. For 8 years she had carried 2 tags. One was hers. The second did not belong to her, but she had kept it because the man who wore it never came home to claim it, and because returning it would have required opening a truth Henry was not ready to face. She had told herself she was protecting him. Maybe she had been protecting herself. Ranger stood, walked to Mara, and nudged her closed fists. The dog remembered. Of course he remembered. Dogs did not care about seal files, wealthy families, hospital politics, or which grief was convenient. Ranger knew scent, signal, loyalty, and the person who had carried him and Henry through the dark. Mara looked at the clock. 4:52 a.m. Dawn was coming. And with it, the promise she had made in a place where morning had felt impossible. She typed one sentence. "If I show you, this room changes." Victor looked at her. No anger left, only dread. "It already has." Mara did not show him then. Not in front of every nurse pressed beyond the glass. Not while Henry was still too weak to guide the truth. Not while the wound was open and everyone's hands were shaking. Lena seemed to understand. She closed the blinds around Henry's bay. The corridor lost its view. Inside the quieter space, only 6 remained. Mara, Victor, Lena, Nora, Henry, and Ranger. The number felt right. Small enough for truth, large enough for witness. Henry breathed slowly. Ranger sat beside him. Lena stood near the monitor, careful not to intrude. Nora stayed by the door like a guard. Victor faced Mara. "I owe you an apology," he said. Mara read the words. They should have mattered more. Earlier, in the corridor, when he pointed at her and stripped her dignity in front of strangers, an apology might have felt like justice. Now it felt like a cup of water handed to someone standing beside the sea. Mara typed, "You owe the truth more than you owe me." Victor flinched. Then he nodded. "Then tell it." Mara looked at Henry. Henry signed. Together, so Mara began. Not with the classified parts, not with tactical maps or orders or anything that still belonged behind locked doors. She told the human part. She told Victor that Henry's unit had been moving with a 9 team attached to a medical evacuation route. She told him Ranger had been young then, disciplined but stubborn, trained to locate survivors and refuse false commands. She told him a storm had cut communication before sunrise, and the official rescue route had changed without reaching the people already inside. She told him confusion became danger. Danger became silence. She did not describe the injuries. She didn't need to. Victor's face carried enough pain without details. She told him Henry had kept Ranger alive by refusing to abandon him. She told him another soldier, Caleb Rohr, had refused to abandon Henry. She told him Caleb had worn the second tag. Victor closed his eyes. "I knew Caleb," he whispered. Mara stopped typing. Victor opened his eyes again. "Wet now?" "He came to our house once. Before deployment, Henry said he was the only man who could make him laugh when everything went wrong." Henry's fingers moved. "Best man I knew." Mara translated with shaking hands. Victor looked at his brother. "Why did you never tell me?" Henry's answer came slowly. "Because he died getting me home." The sentence entered the room without sound. Nora covered her mouth. Lena looked down. Victor stepped back as if struck by something invisible. Mara's throat tightened, though she could not hear the silence that followed. She felt it in the stillness of bodies, in Ranger's lowered head, in Henry's eyes fixed on the ceiling because looking at his brother was too hard. Victor whispered, "I thought you shut me out because you were angry." Henry's fingers trembled. "I was ashamed." Mara typed the words for him, each letter heavier than the last. Victor shook his head. Henry closed his eyes. Ranger placed his muzzle gently on Henry's hand. Mara watched the dog give comfort with no need to understand guilt, rank, or time. Ranger only knew his person was hurting, and that was enough. Henry signed again. Mara did not translate immediately. Victor looked at her. "Bish," Mara typed. "He says Caleb gave Mara the tags and made her promise to bring Ranger and Henry home." Victor turned to her. The old anger on his face had completely collapsed. "You were there." Mara nodded. Henry signed. She lost her hearing there. Mara's hands froze. She looked at Henry, warning in her eyes. He signed again. "Tell him." Mara backed away once. "No." Her sign was sharp, instinctive. Henry's eyes filled. "Please." Victor looked from one to the other, understanding only that a deeper layer had opened. Mara felt suddenly trapped between two loyalties. The promise to protect Henry from the unbearable weight of his survival, and the promise to Caleb that truth would not be buried. She had chosen Henry's silence for 8 years. She had respected it because she loved him as a patient, as a survivor, as someone she had carried through the last hour before morning. But silence had not healed him. It had made Mara smaller, and it had left Caleb's name in the dark. Mara lifted her tablet. "I was the medic who reached them. I was not supposed to be there. The route was closed." Ranger found the way back to Henry when the radios failed. "Caleb handed me his tags before the last extraction. He told me to make sure Henry did not turn his survival into a punishment." Victor read the words slowly. His face broke. Henry turned his head away, tears sliding silently into his hair. Mara continued, I failed that part? Henry's hand moved fast despite his weakness. No. Mara shook her head, but Henry insisted. No. Ranger rose and came to her again. The dog pressed his forehead against her thigh. Mara looked down at him, and for the first time that night, her tears fell. Not loud, not dramatic, just 2 lines down her face under the bright ear light. While the dog who remembered leaned against the nurse everyone had mocked, Victor looked at her hearing aids. His voice when he spoke was barely shaped. I said you could not hear his monitor. Mara wiped her face. Victor swallowed hard. And you lost your hearing saving him. Mara did not correct him. The full truth was more complicated. It always was. She had not saved Henry alone. Caleb had saved him. Ranger had saved him. A chain of courage had passed through darkness, hand to hand, until morning found only some of them alive. But Victor understood enough to be ashamed. He looked at Nora. How many people heard what I said? Nora did not soften it. Enough, Victor nodded, accepting the wound he had made. Then enough will hear me take it back? Mara looked up sharply. Victor turned toward the blinds. Mara caught his sleeve before he could open them. He stopped, he signed, then typed, "Not for me, not now, Henry first." Victor read it. His eyes moved to his brother. For once, he listened. The hours before dawn narrowed into a fragile peace. Henry's treatment continued with the corrected protocol. His breathing steadied. His color improved. Lena checked every change twice, not because she doubted Mara now, but because the truth deserved careful hands. Nora sent the watching staff back to their stations with one look, though everyone knew something extraordinary had happened behind the closed blinds. Victor stayed beside Henry's bed. He did not make calls. He did not threaten legal action. He did not demand coffee or updates every 2 minutes. He sat in the hard plastic chair like any other frightened family member, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. Mara stood near the door, uncertain of her place now that the emergency had shifted from medical to emotional. Ranger kept looking at her, then at Henry, as if making sure his 2 lost people remained in the same room. At 5:26 a.m., Henry slept. Lena dimmed the lights. Nora stepped outside to manage the corridor. Mara picked up her tablet and moved to leave. Victor looked up. "Please don't go." Mara stopped. He stood slowly. "Not until I say this correctly." Mara faced him. Victor took a breath. "I humiliated you in public because I thought power gave me the right to decide who mattered. I used your deafness as an insult. I dismissed your warning. I treated Ranger like an inconvenience when he was trying to help my brother. I was wrong." Mara read his lips carefully. The apology did not erase the corridor, but it entered the room honestly, and that mattered. Victor continued, "I do not expect forgiveness tonight." Good, Mara thought. Forgiveness was not a discharge paper someone else could sign. Victor glanced at Henry. "But I need to ask something I might not deserve to ask. What happened to Caleb's family?" Mara's fingers tightened around the tags. She typed. His mother received official notice, not the full story. Henry wrote letters and never sent them. Victor closed his eyes briefly. "He kept them." Mara nodded. "In his house?" Another nod. Victor looked at his sleeping brother. "All these years," Mara typed, "survivors keep what they cannot carry." Victor read the sentence 3 times. Then he looked toward Ranger. "And Ranger?" Mara's face softened. Ranger was transferred after recovery. Henry fought to adopt him after retirement. The file says he was assigned as a service dog, but I think they assigned each other. For the first time that night, Victor's mouth almost smiled. Ranger's tail moved once against the floor. A nurse opened the blinds slightly to check in, then froze when she saw Victor Vale standing before Mara Ellis with his head bowed. Word traveled faster than orders. Soon the corridor knew something had changed again. At 5:48 a.m., Henry woke. The sky beyond the narrow ear windows had lightened from black to deep blue. Dawn was close enough to touch the edges of the glass. Henry looked at Mara, then at Victor, then at the tag still in Mara's hand. His fingers moved. "It is time." Mara shook her head slightly. Henry signed again. "Please." Victor saw the plea this time, even if he did not know the words. "What is he asking?" Mara did not type. Her eyes stayed on Henry. For 8 years, the tags had lived against her skin. She slept with them, worked with them, hid them from patients, from colleagues, from anyone who might ask. On bad nights, when a veteran flinched at a slammed door or a service dog stared too long at an empty corner, she held the tags until the past quieted enough for her to breathe. They had become proof. They had become proof. They had also become a prison. Henry's hand trembled. Ranger rose. The dog walked to Mara, then turned back to Henry. A simple movement. A bridge. Mara understood. She stepped closer to Henry's bed. Victor stood uncertain. Henry reached out with weak fingers. Mara placed the second tag in his palm. Caleb's tag. Henry closed his hand around it and broke. No sound filled Mara's ears, but she saw the sob move through him. Victor did too. He sat quickly on the edge of the chair, gripping his brother's shoulder. Henry held the tag to his chest. His fingers moved against it. "I am sorry." Mara translated quietly on the tablet and showed Victor. Victor's face crumpled. Henry signed again. "I came home." Mara's hands shook as she typed. Victor read it aloud, though Mara could not hear him. "I came home." Henry's fingers moved. He didn't. The room seemed to bend around those two sentences. Victor leaned over his brother, not as a CEO, not as a donor, not as a man who commanded corridors, but as someone finally allowed into the grief he had mistaken for rejection. "You came home because he loved you," Victor said. "Because Mara did her job. Because Ranger found you. That does not make your life a theft." Henry's eyes closed. Mara stared at Victor. He looked at her as if asking whether he had said the right thing. Mara nodded once. Ranger placed his paws gently near the bed rail, not climbing, not disturbing, just close enough for Henry to touch him. Then Henry did something Mara did not expect. He opened his hand and held Caleb's tag out toward Victor. Victor stared at it. Henry signed, "Know him." Mara translated. Victor took the tag with both hands. The instant metal left Henry's palm. Mara's own tag slipped from her loosened fingers. The chain tangled once around her wrist, snapped free, and both remaining tags struck the hospital floor. A small, bright sound cut through the room. Mara could not hear it, but everyone else did. Victor flinched. Lena looked up from the monitor. Nora opened the door. The nurses in the corridor turned. Ranger lowered his head to the floor between the tags and rested his nose beside them, as if guarding the truth now that it had finally landed where everyone could see. Mara stood frozen. Her dog tags lay under the ER light. Mara Quinn Ellis, 9 Medevac Unit 13. Before dawn, the words were visible. No explanation could soften them. No insult could survive beside them. No one in that corridor could pretend the woman Victor Vale had pointed at, mocked, and ordered removes was simply an inconvenient nurse playing at courage. She was part of the story that had saved Henry Vale. She was the medic Ranger remembered. She was the silence Henry had trusted. She was the proof the room had refused to see until it hit the floor. And outside the window, the first thin line of morning appeared. Before dawn, the corridor gathered without being called. No one rushed in. No one spoke over the moment. Nurses stood at respectful distance. The young security guard removed his cap without knowing why. An administrator who had earlier looked away now stared at the floor as if memorizing the weight of metal. Victor bent slowly. For a second, Mara thought he meant to pick up the tags. Ranger lifted his head and looked at him. Victor stopped. The dog did not growl. He did not threaten. He simply held Victor's gaze with the calm authority of a witness who had waited 8 years for humans to stop lying to themselves. Victor understood. He looked at Mara. "My eye." Mara looked at the tags, then at Ranger. She signed safe. Ranger stepped back. Victor picked up Mara's tags with both hands. He did not hold them like evidence. He held them like something sacred. Then he turned toward the corridor. Every face watched him now. The same people who had watched him point at Mara. The same people who had heard him reduce her silence to weakness. Victor's voice shook, but he did not hide behind it. "Earlier tonight," he said, "I disgraced myself in this corridor." Mara read his lips from beside Henry's bed. Nora stood very still. Victor continued, "I pointed at Nurse Mara Elise and ordered her removed from my brother's care. I insulted her deafness. I dismissed her warning. I treated her service dog's alert as an inconvenience and her expertise as interference." He looked down at the tags. "I was wrong." No one moved. "This nurse knew what my brother needed before any of us did. Ranger knew her because he survived with her. My brother knew her because she carried him through a night my family never understood. These tags are not decoration. They are proof of service, sacrifice, and a promise kept longer than most of us could bear." Mara's throat tightened. Victor turned to face her fully. "In front of everyone who heard me humiliate you," he said, "I apologize." The corridor remained silent. Not empty silence, full silence. The kind Mara understood best. She walked forward and took the tags from his hands. For a moment, they stood facing each other. The CEO, whose money covered the walls, and the deaf nurse whose hidden history had saved the man he loved. Mara typed on her tablet, "Do not make me a symbol to clean your guilt." Victor read it, and the words struck exactly where she intended. He nodded slowly. "No speeches, then," he said. "Action." Mara held his gaze. "Nurse Bell, I want a formal review of tonight's conduct, including mine." The administrator behind him looked alarmed. Victor ignored him. He turned to Lena. "Dr. Ortiz, whatever policy blocked Ranger's role in Henry's care, fix it. Service dogs trained for medical alerts should not have to prove themselves through crisis." Lena nodded. "We can review protocols." Victor looked back at Mara. "And if Nurse Ellis is willing, I would like the hospital to establish communication standards for deaf and hard of hearing staff and patients. Not as charity, as competence we should already have had." Mara studied him. Words were easy after shame, but this was not nothing. She typed, "Ask the deaf staff what they need. Do not decide for us." Victor almost smiled through his grief. "Fair." Henry shifted in the bed. Everyone turned. He was awake again, watching the corridor through the open blinds. His eyes moved to the staff gathered outside, then to Mara's tags. His fingers lifted weakly. "Ranger." The dog went to him at once. Henry signed slowly. "Home." Mara translated for Victor. "He wants Ranger close." Victor nodded, wiping his face quickly. "Always." Henry looked at Mara. His fingers moved again. "You too." Mara swallowed. Henry's eyes softened. "Family." Mara looked away. That word was harder than any insult. For years she had lived as if duty could replace belonging. She had taken night shifts because darkness asked fewer questions. She had let colleagues know her as skilled, quiet, distant. She had loved patients carefully and released them before they could love her back. Henry had been the one survivor she could not release because his silence was tied to hers. And Ranger had been the witness both of them trusted more than memory. Now the dog lay with his head beside Henry's hand, calm and protected, alive in the light of morning, and Mara's tags were no longer hidden. The sun did not rise all at once. It entered the hospital slowly, first as a pale line beyond the parking structure, then as a faint glow on the corridor floor, then as a soft reflection on the glass doors of the ER, where families still waited, ambulances still came, and nurses still moved from one fragile life to the next. By 6:15 a.m., Henry was stable enough to move to a monitored room. Ranger walked beside him, officially documented as medically necessary support. No one questioned it. No one dared. Mara walked on the other side of the stretcher, not because she was assigned, but because Henry's hand kept searching for the old field signal, and she answered each time, alive, stay, home. Victor followed behind, carrying Caleb's tag in a small evidence pouch Lena had found. Not because it was evidence now, but because Victor could not yet trust his hands not to shake. At the elevator, Henry looked at Mara again. He sighed, tell his mother. Mara's eyes closed. That was the hardest promise left. She opened them and nodded. Together, Henry's shoulders eased. The elevator doors opened. Before he entered, Victor turned back to the ER corridor. The staff were no longer staring, but they were aware. Everyone was aware. Some had work to do. Some had guilt to carry. Some had learned that the quietest person in the room might be the one holding the truth together. Victor faced Mara one last time before going upstairs with his brother. I cannot undo what I did, he said. Mara read his lips. He continued, but I can make sure this hospital remembers what it should have known before tonight. Mara typed, hospitals should not need heroes to treat people with dignity. Victor read it and nodded. No, he said, they should not. The elevator doors closed with Henry, Victor, Ranger, and Lena inside. Mara remained in the corridor with Nora. For the first time since the night began, Mara let herself lean against the wall. Nora stood beside her. You okay? Nora asked. Mara gave a small laugh without sound and shook her head. Nora smiled sadly. Are you standing? Mara nodded. Nora looked at the tags now resting openly over Mara's scrubs. Are you going to keep wearing them where people can see? Mara touched the metal. For years, hiding them had felt like humility, then like safety, then like habit. Tonight, when they hit the floor, she realized hiding had also allowed others to write emptier stories over her life. She typed, might be not always, but not because I am ashamed. Nora nodded. Good. Across the corridor, the young security guard approached nervously. Mara straightened. He held his cap in both hands. I'm sorry, he said carefully, facing her so she could read him. I followed the order. I should have done it differently. Mara looked at him. Then she typed, you stopped when Ranger told you to. He blinked, then managed a weak smile. Smart dog. Mara looked toward the elevator. Yes, a message appeared on the ER communication board minutes later. Mandatory staff debrief at noon. Service animal protocol review. Accessibility standards review. Incident disclosure pending. Nora read it and raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Mara typed. Guilt moves quickly when witnesses remain. Nora laughed once, then covered it with a sigh. Mara finally walked to the staff room to wash her face. The mirror showed the same woman who had come to work 12 hours earlier. Dark hair pinned back, tired eyes, hearing aids stuck behind both ears, navy scrubs wrinkled from the night. But the tags changed the reflection, not because they made her stronger. She had been strong before anyone saw them. They changed the reflection because she no longer had to pretend. Her silence began in weakness. When she returned to the ER, a little girl in the waiting area watched her pass. The child wore bright pink hearing aids and held her mother's hand. Mara noticed the child staring at the tags, then at Mara's ears. Mara paused. She lifted her hand and signed hello. The girl's face lit up. She signed back shyly. Nurse? Mara smiled. Yes. The girl looked at the tags again. Hero. Mara's smile faded into something gentler. She signed slowly. Helper. The girl considered that, then nodded with solemn approval. Helper. Mara walked away with tears in her eyes again. But this time they did not come from grief alone. Upstairs, Henry slept with Ranger beside the bed. Victor sat near the window, Caleb's tag held between both palms. Lena updated the chart with careful language that protected what still needed protecting and documented what medicine needed to know. Nora began collecting statements, not to punish for sport, but to make sure the truth could not be softened into a misunderstanding by morning administrators. By sunrise, the hospital had changed in small ways that would become larger later. A sign language interpreter was called for the debrief. Service dog access policies were pulled for review. The staff who had watched Mara be humiliated began, one by one, to meet her eyes, not with pity, with respect. And Mara, who had spent years moving quietly through corridors built for sound, walked back into the ER wearing her tags openly. They rested against her chest with every step, a reminder of the night before dawn, a reminder of Ranger's witness, a reminder that truth does not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it waits beside a stretcher. Sometimes it signs with shaking fingers. Sometimes it lies hidden under a nurse's collar until the world becomes cruel enough, desperate enough, and honest enough to hear metal strike the floor. Before dawn, they had called Mara Ellis a distraction. By sunrise, they knew she had been the only one reading every warning in the room. Ranger never needed proof. Henry never forgot. And the tags that fell to the floor carried more truth than Victor Vale's power ever could. So when you see someone quiet, overlooked, or mocked, remember Mara. Dignity does not need noise to survive. If this story moved you, share where you are watching from, and stay with Silent Valor Kind for the next tale.